My name is Hyun Woo, and my life changed the moment my father made a deal with the devil himself. I remember that day with crystalline clarity, the way my father's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the mahogany dining table in our modest Seoul apartment, his face ashen beneath the warm glow of the overhead lights. The leather chair creaked beneath his weight as he slumped, shoulders heaving with the burden of unsustainable debt. 3 million won had seemed like a manageable loan when he first borrowed it from the underground finance company. Now, with compounding interest and penalties, the amount had ballooned to an astronomical 15 million, a number so large it might as well have been a death sentence for our family. I had been 19 years old when this nightmare began, working part-time at a local cafe to help support us. I was 21 now, and despite my efforts, despite sacrificing my education to take extra shifts, we were drowning. My father's small architectural business had collapsed during the market downturn, and the loans he'd taken to stay afloat had become anchors dragging us all beneath the waves. But there was always something different about my father, a certain dignity that poverty and shame couldn't strip away. He was a man of principle, someone who believed that hard work and integrity would eventually see us through. That was part of what made this moment so devastatingly difficult for him. I could see it in the way his eyes refused to meet mine, in the tremor of his voice when he finally called me into that room 3 weeks before everything changed forever. "Hyun Woo," he had said, and those 2 words carried the weight of centuries. "Please sit down. We need to talk." I had sat, my heart already sensing something momentous was about to unfold. My father was a handsome man in his early 60s, his hair more silver than black now, his face lined with the cares of providing for a family that had lost its mother far too young. My mother had passed away when I was 12, and my father had raised me alone with a tenderness that never wavered, even when finances grew tight. He had never made me feel like a burden, even though I'm sure he must have felt the weight of that responsibility crushing him. "The debt," he had begun, his voice barely above a whisper. "The money I owe. They've given me an ultimatum, Hyun Woo. 1 month. They want everything in 1 month, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The threats from the loan sharks had become increasingly violent, their collectors more aggressive. Just the week before, they had shown up at our apartment, frightening my elderly neighbor half to death. My father had paid them what little we had left, but it was merely a drop in an endless ocean of debt. "Father," I had said, moving from my chair to kneel beside him, taking his calloused hands in mine. "We'll figure this out. We always do. Maybe I can look for additional work, or perhaps—" "No," he had interrupted, his voice suddenly firm despite the tears that had begun to slide down his weathered cheeks. "No, my son. There is no figuring it out. Not this time. The debt has been transferred." My blood had gone cold at those words. Transferred to whom? I had asked, though I was already filled with a terrible dread. To Kang Min. The name had hung in the air like a curse, like an invocation of something dark and terrible. Even I, sheltered as I was in my small apartment, working my humble cafe job, knew who Kang Min was. Everyone in Seoul knew who he was, whispered about him in hushed tones, crossed the street to avoid even the hint of his presence. Kang Min was the undisputed king of Seoul's underground. The ruthless alpha mafia boss who had risen to power through means that were best not inquired about too closely. He ran gambling dens, nightclubs, and protection rackets with an iron fist and a heart reportedly made of stone. There were stories about him, dark stories. A man who had clawed his way up from nothing to command an empire of crime. An alpha of alphas, feared and revered in equal measure. And then, 3 years ago, tragedy had struck even him. His wife, I couldn't quite remember her name, but she had been a media darling, known for her beauty and grace, had been killed in a car accident. After her death, Kang Min had apparently become even more ruthless, his heart growing colder with each passing day. He had turned the loss into motivation for greater control, greater power. It was said that no one had seen him smile since his wife's funeral. Why would Kang Min acquire a debt this small? I had asked, my mind struggling to process the implications. Surely men like him deal in much larger sums. My father's response had been to grip my hands even tighter, his thumb rubbing circles on my skin in a gesture that was both comforting and deeply unsettling. Because, he had said quietly, he was owed a favor by the finance company head. And when I heard that Kang Min had the debt, I went to see him. I thought perhaps I could appeal to him, man to man, ask for an extension or some way to manage the payments. And I had prompted, though I was beginning to sense where this conversation was heading, and I didn't like it one bit. My father had released my hands and stood up, walking to the window that overlooked our small balcony and the Seoul cityscape beyond. The city lights had glittered like diamonds that evening, beautiful and indifferent to our suffering. He offered me a solution, my father had said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. An alternative to paying the debt. What kind of alternative? My father had turned back to face me, and the anguish in his eyes had been almost unbearable to witness. In that moment he looked every one of his 60-plus years, worn and broken by the weight of responsibility. He wanted to know about you, he had said. About my son. Those words had sent a chill racing down my spine. I am an Omega, a fact I've never hidden, though I'm also aware that it makes me somewhat of a rarity in certain circles. While Omegas aren't uncommon in modern soul, there was something about my particular blend of delicate features, my soft voice, my natural grace and elegance that made my secondary gender very apparent. I had always been thankful for this clarity. It meant I didn't have to explain or justify my nature to anyone. But the way my father was looking at me suggested that my Omega status had just become the currency with which we were negotiating our survival. Father, I had said carefully, standing to face him. What did he ask? He asked if you were unmated and if you were of eligible age. When I told him you were both unmated and 21, My father had paused, searching for words that seemed to hurt him physically to speak. He made me an offer, Hyunwoo. An offer to clear the debt entirely. Before we dive into this heartwarming, emotional, slow-burn romance Omegaverse story, note, this is an original work of Milliflex channel. If seen in another channel that is not Milliflex, please report that channel for copyright and impersonation. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. My heart had begun to pound. I had walked toward my father, my delicate features, the ones that marked me as Omega, suddenly feeling like a liability rather than simply part of who I was. What kind of offer, father? I had whispered, though I already knew. Some part of me had already intuited the answer. He wants to marry you, my father had said, and the words had shattered everything. The next 3 weeks had been a blur of conflicting emotions. My father had tried his best to explain the situation, to present it as a possibility rather than a doom, but we both knew the truth. We both understood the gravity of what was being asked of me. I had asked my father to tell me everything he knew about Kang Min, not as a crime boss or a legend but as a person. What I learned had been both terrifying and somehow oddly moving. Kang Min was born to poverty and violence, raised in the slums by a mother who worked herself to death while her husband drank away their meager earnings. At 14, young Min had already begun to build his empire, first through street fighting, then through protection rackets, and eventually through the various criminal enterprises he now controlled with absolute precision. He was brilliant, reportedly a genius with numbers and strategy, and his business acumen made him wealthy enough that crime was almost secondary to legitimate enterprises he had begun acquiring. At 28, at the height of his power and influence, he had shocked everyone by marrying a woman named Ji-won. She came from a respectable family, worked as a therapist, and by all accounts had been the one thing that made him seem almost human. They had appeared in public together rarely, but the few times they had been photographed, the tenderness in his expression had been unmistakable. That tenderness had died with her in a car accident that some whispered was no accident at all, though no investigation had ever been opened. Since her death, Kang Min had become what my father called something beyond human, something cold and dangerous, operating more on pure instinct and ruthlessness than on any moral framework. My father had warned me that Kang Min was not simply a dangerous man. He was a man whose humanity had died along with his wife, leaving behind only the alpha predator. I won't force you, my father had told me multiple times over those 3 weeks. I won't, Hyunwoo. This is your decision and yours alone. We'll find another way. We always. But we both knew we wouldn't find another way. We both knew we were out of options. I had spent those final days before the wedding in a state of numb acceptance. I took extra shifts at the cafe, saying goodbye to my coworkers without explaining why. I visited our family shrine and made offerings for protection and guidance. I had spent an entire evening going through my mother's things, looking at photos of her radiant smile, wishing she were here to guide me through this impossible situation. On the night before the wedding, my father and I had sat together on the sofa, not speaking, just existing in each other's presence. He had held my hand the way he used to when I was a child, and I had rested my head on his shoulder, drawing comfort from his heartbeat, his warmth, his steadfast presence. You are so much stronger than I am, he had whispered into my hair. So much braver. Your mother would be so proud of you. I'm terrified, I had admitted, my voice small in the darkness. I know, he had replied. But you're also the most principled person I know. That strength of spirit, that will, it's something that can't be broken. Hold on to that, Hyunwoo. No matter what happens, hold on to your core. That's what will save you. The day of my wedding arrived like an unwanted guest at a funeral. I stood in the dressing room of the exclusive venue that Kang Min's people had arranged, staring at myself in the mirror with a sense of profound disconnection. The man looking back at me was undeniably beautiful. I've never been modest about this fact, with delicate, feminine features that marked me clearly as an omega. My skin was pale, almost porcelain, and my dark hair had been styled in soft waves that fell past my shoulders. My lips were naturally pink, a shade that makeup artists had enhanced but not altered. My brown eyes, large and expressive, reflected the confusion and fear roiling inside me. The traditional wedding hanbok I wore was exquisite, pale silk the color of moonlight, embroidered with delicate patterns of cranes and clouds. It should have been a moment of joy and anticipation. Instead, it felt like I was being dressed as a sacrifice. My father appeared in the doorway, and I saw him pause at the sight of me. His eyes filled with tears, not tears of happiness but tears of resignation and sorrow. "You look beautiful, my son," he said, coming to stand beside me and placing his hands on my shoulders. His grip was firm, grounding. "Remember what I told you. Remember your strength." I nodded, unable to find words. What could I say? That I was terrified? That I wanted to run? That I was about to marry a man I'd never met, a man whose very name inspired fear in the hearts of grown men? "Let me see his face one more time," I had asked my father, "before I marry him. Please, just so I know what I'm walking into." My father had hesitated, then nodded. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. What I saw made my breath catch. The man in the photo was striking in a way that transcended mere physical attractiveness. He was an alpha. That much was immediately apparent from his powerful frame and the commanding presence that seemed to radiate from him even through a two-dimensional image. His left eye was pale gray, sharp and intelligent, surveying the world with the gaze of a predator. His right eye was covered with a black eye patch, a distinctive mark of his blindness from whatever tragedy had befallen him. But it was his face that captured me, the clean lines of his jaw, the sharp cheekbones, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He was handsome, devastatingly so, in a way that seemed almost cruel. His lips were firm, sensual, and utterly unsmiling in the photograph. There was no warmth in his expression, no tenderness. Only cold, calculated intelligence and the weight of command. "His name is Kang Min," my father said quietly. "He's 34 years old. Born in the Gangnam district slums, rose through." "I know his history," I interrupted gently. "This is enough." But it wasn't enough. As I handed the phone back to my father, I realized that knowing what Kang Min looked like, seeing his face, made this infinitely more real. He wasn't just a concept or a fate imposed upon me, he was a man. A beautiful, terrifying man who had agreed to marry me to clear my family's debt. The ceremony itself was a blur of silk and incense and formal words. Kang Min stood at the altar dressed in a midnight blue wedding suit that had been tailored to perfection, showcasing his broad shoulders and powerful frame. When I walked toward him on my father's arm, I saw his one good eye trace over me, assessing me with the same calculating gaze he'd turned on countless business dealings. There was no recognition of me as a person. No warmth or welcome. Just appraisal. We exchanged vows before a small gathering of what I assumed were Kang Min's associates and a few of my father's friends. The words felt hollow, ritual rather than genuine. When Kang Min's cold hand reached out to slip the wedding ring onto my finger, I felt the first genuine tremor of fear run through me. This was real. I was now married to Kang Min, the ruthless mafia alpha. There was no going back. The reception was held at one of Seoul's most exclusive hotels, a grand ballroom dripping with expensive decorations. The guest list was full of dangerous-looking men in expensive suits, Kang Min's associates, I assumed, and they all watched me with a mixture of curiosity and something darker that I couldn't quite identify. Kang Min barely spoke to me throughout the evening. He would occasionally turn to address me directly, but his comments were perfunctory, asking if I was hungry, if the venue was suitable, if I was comfortable. All delivered in a tone that suggested he didn't actually care about any of these things. I was a possession now, a settlement to a debt. My comfort or happiness was irrelevant. When dinner was served, I picked at my food, my stomach too knotted with anxiety to eat. Kang Min consumed his meal with methodical precision, his movements controlled and economical. Everything about him spoke of discipline and control. As the evening wore on, there were speeches. Several of Kang Min's associates stood to offer their congratulations, though the tone of these speeches was strange, more acknowledging the significance of this marriage as some sort of business arrangement than genuinely celebrating a union of love. One older man with a scarred face stood and raised his glass. "To Kang Min," he said, his voice rough from years of cigarettes. "May this marriage bring him the peace he deserves." There was something almost kind in that sentiment, though it also underscored the reality that Kang Min was seen as damaged, broken, in need of repair. I wondered if anyone had consulted him on whether he actually wanted peace, or if his desires were as irrelevant as mine. As the night grew late, I found myself standing on a balcony overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, seeking a moment of solitude. The cold night air helped clear my head, though it did nothing to ease my anxiety about what was coming. "You're quiet," a voice said behind me. I turned to find Kang Min emerging from the shadows, still impeccably dressed, his eye patch catching the light of the city below. "I'm nervous," I admitted, deciding that honesty was perhaps the only thing I had left to offer. "Of what?" he asked, coming to stand beside me, maintaining a careful distance. "Of you," I said simply. "Of this situation. Of what comes next." He was silent for a long moment, and I could feel his eyes studying me, assessing me once again. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured. "I want to be clear about something, Hyun-woo," he said, using my name for the first time. "This is a transaction. Your father's debt is cleared. Beyond that, you're free to occupy yourself however you wish. There are no expectations regarding affection or emotional connection. We are not in love and we never will be." His words should have stung. Perhaps they did, somewhere deep inside me. But mostly I felt a strange sense of relief. At least he was being honest about what this was. At least I wouldn't suffer under false hopes or expectations of something more. "I understand," I said quietly. "Good," he replied. "Then we should leave. Our honeymoon suite awaits." His tone suggested he was discussing a business transaction rather than a wedding night. For the first time since my father had told me of this marriage, I felt something shift within me. Fear was still present, yes, but it was joined by something else, a kind of defiant resignation. If I was going to be used, I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. The hotel suite was as luxurious as I might have expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering expanse of Seoul, a sunken living room with furniture that probably cost more than my father made in a year, and through a doorway, a bedroom dominated by a massive four-poster bed with sheets that looked like they were made from silk spun by angels. Kang Min closed the door behind us with a finality that felt like a lock clicking shut on my old life. Without a word, he began loosening his tie, his movements economical and practiced. He had the bearing of a man who had done this countless times before, brought a woman to a bedroom and simply taken what he wanted. I stood near the window, my hands clasped before me, my heart thundering in my chest. My delicate Omega nature screamed at me to submit, to offer myself up, to acknowledge his strength and dominance. But I had never been a submissive person by nature. I was an Omega, yes, but I was also Hyun-woo, a man with principles, with a will, with a spirit that had been forged in the fires of protecting my family and maintaining my dignity despite poverty and hardship. "You're still fully clothed," Kang Min observed, his tone suggesting mild amusement at my hesitation. "I know," I replied, turning to face him. He was now shirtless, his powerful frame a study in carefully maintained muscle and athletic grace. An alpha's body honed to perfection. His skin was smooth, marked only by a few scars, souvenirs of a life spent in violence. "I'm waiting for you to explain what you expect from me." He raised an eyebrow, or at least I assumed he did. The gesture was made with his one visible eye. "I thought I was clear downstairs. I want you to fulfill your duties." "Being married doesn't automatically mean I'm ready to have sex with a complete stranger," I said, keeping my voice level despite the flutter of panic in my chest. "I may be an Omega, but I'm also a person. I deserve at least basic courtesy." For a long moment, Kang Min simply stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, to my absolute shock, he laughed, a low, controlled sound that held no warmth whatsoever. "You're serious," he said, moving toward the minibar and pouring himself a drink. "You actually think you're in a position to negotiate with me?" "I'm not negotiating," I replied, taking a step forward to meet him halfway across the room. "I'm stating a fact. You may own me as a possession through this marriage, but you don't own my willingness to participate in intimacy. That's still mine to give or withhold." He turned to face me fully, his powerful frame suddenly seeming to dominate the space between us. An alpha's pheromones, sharp, commanding, deeply masculine, rolled off him in waves, and my Omega body responded despite my mind's fierce resistance. My pulse quickened, my breathing became shallow, my skin felt suddenly too tight. "Do you know what I did to the last person who refused me?" he asked softly, and the threat hanging beneath his words was unmistakable. "No," I said, and I was proud that my voice didn't shake. "But I'm betting you're about to tell me as a means of intimidation. Let me save you the effort, I'm already terrified. What you'll add to that terror by telling me violent stories is just more details to be afraid of. So either kill me, or accept that I'm not going to play the role of a submissive Omega who crumbles under threat." I could see anger flash across his features. Genuine anger, not the calculated coldness he'd displayed thus far. In that moment, he looked frightening in a way that went beyond his appearance. He looked like a man capable of terrible things. But he also looked, oddly, like someone who had been challenged in a way he wasn't accustomed to being challenged. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said, setting down his drink with a deliberate motion. "Perhaps I'm both," I replied. "Or perhaps I simply have nothing left to lose. My family's debt is cleared regardless of whether I sleep with you tonight. My fate is sealed either way. So what difference does my willingness make?" He was moving toward me then, his powerful frame advancing, and I held my ground despite every instinct screaming at me to run. This was the test, I realized. This was the moment where I would decide who I was going to be in this marriage. A victim or a person with agency, however limited. He stopped inches from me, his eye boring into mine. This close, I could see that his iris was a striking pale gray, almost silver, with dark striations running through it. In this close proximity, I could smell him. Not just his alpha pheromones, which were overwhelmingly masculine and made my omega body respond despite my mind's rebellion, but underneath that, something else. Something that smelled like leather and expensive cologne and something uniquely him. "If you're trying to provoke me into hurting you to prove some kind of point," he said quietly, "you're going to be disappointed. I don't need to hurt you, Hyun-woo. But I will have you." He reached out and grasped my chin in his large hand, tilting my face up to his. For a moment I thought he was going to kiss me. Instead, he simply held me there, our faces inches apart, his breath warm against my skin. "Perhaps we should establish some ground rules," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't force something that's supposed to be intimate. It won't be satisfying for either of us if I'm just lying beneath you like a log." I saw something flicker in his eye, maybe surprise, maybe reluctant respect. He released my chin and stepped back, the distance between us suddenly feeling enormous. "What kind of ground rules are you proposing?" he asked, returning to his drink. "First, we need to get to know each other, at least minimally. I can't be intimate with someone who's completely unknown to me. Second, there should be a degree of mutual consideration. You're not forcing yourself on me, and I'm not refusing you out of spite. We're having an arrangement, yes, but it should be one that both parties can participate in with some degree of willingness." He listened to me without interruption, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You realize that by suggesting these things you're implying that there's a we in this situation," he said finally. "That we're equal parties with equal stakes. We're not equal, Hyun-woo. I hold all the power here." "You do," I acknowledged. "But if you wanted to simply use me without my participation, you wouldn't have agreed to marry me. You have money, you have power, you have access to plenty of people who would do whatever you wanted out of fear or desire. The fact that you're married to me suggests that you wanted something more legitimate." He turned away from me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his muscles clenched beneath his skin. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "We'll do this your way for now. We'll get to know each other. We'll make this an arrangement, rather than an arrangement. But understand this, Hyun-woo, I will have you in every way that matters. Whether it's tonight or a month from now, whether you're willing or not, you will fulfill your function." The threat in his words was unmistakable, but I also detected something else. A kind of resignation, as if he was already prepared for me to be difficult. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "That's all I'm asking." That first night, we slept on opposite sides of the enormous bed, a chasm of silk sheets and tension between us. I lay awake for hours, listening to his breathing, aware of his presence beside me with every fiber of my being. My omega instincts were in constant rebellion, screaming at me to move closer to him, to submit, to offer myself to the powerful alpha beside me. But my mind, my will, my sense of self held firm. I would not be broken. Not tonight and perhaps not ever. The following days took on a strange rhythm. Kang Min had business to attend to, which meant that several hours each day were spent away from the penthouse apartment that had been prepared for us. The apartment was in a building that Kang Min owned, a luxury high-rise in the Gangnam district with security that was clearly trained to keep out anyone who wasn't supposed to be there. I spent those early days exploring the apartment. A sprawling space of marble and minimalist design that felt more like an art gallery than a home. There were photos in some of the rooms, relics from Kang Min's previous life. I found several of him with a beautiful woman, presumably his late wife, Ji-won, and looking at those images was like looking at a small window into the humanity that grief had nearly stripped away from him. In one particular photograph, Kang Min was smiling, genuinely smiling, his entire face transformed by the expression. He looked younger, more vulnerable, almost boyish in his happiness. Ji-won stood beside him, her head tilted against his shoulder, her expression radiating contentment. It was clear from a single photograph that they had loved each other deeply. I understood then, in a way I hadn't before, exactly what I was dealing with. Kang Min wasn't simply a ruthless criminal who had agreed to marry me out of some perverted desire for control. He was a broken man who had lost the one person who mattered to him and had since locked away the capacity to care, replacing it with the machinery of power and dominance. In the evenings, when he returned to the apartment, we would sit together in the living room, and I would ask him questions about his life. Some he answered, most he didn't. But I persisted because I understood that if there was any possibility of this situation becoming something other than purely transactional, we needed to bridge the vast distance between us. One evening, about a week after our wedding, he asked me about my family. I told him about my mother, about how she had died when I was young, about the various ways my father had worked to provide for me despite impossible circumstances. Your father gave you to me to save himself, Kang Min said bluntly, and there was something almost accusatory in his tone. He gave me to you to save our family, I corrected gently. There's a difference. My father loves me more than anything. This was the hardest decision of his life. He would have taken my place in an instant if he could have. Yet he didn't, Kang Min observed coldly. No, I acknowledged. Because I wouldn't let him. Because I'm stronger than he is and I knew I could endure this. Because family takes care of family even when it means sacrifice. He was quiet for a long moment and I could see something working behind his eye. Some recognition or understanding that flickered across his features before he could suppress it. Your dedication to your family is admirable, he said finally. But misplaced. Your father made a deal that benefits him. There's no nobility in that, no matter how you frame it. Maybe not, I said. But that's my father and I love him regardless. Kang Min stood and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the Seoul skyline. In the reflection of the glass, I could see his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the strong arch of his nose, the way his eye gazed out at the city like a king surveying his kingdom. My wife used to speak similarly, he said quietly, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. About loyalty, about love, about the nobility of sacrifice. She was naive but not in an annoying way. In a way that was. He paused, searching for a word. Pure. What was her name? I asked, already knowing the answer but wanting him to speak it, to acknowledge her continued existence. Jiwon, he said, and the way he said it, the weight of grief and longing in those two syllables, was almost unbearable to hear. Tell me about her, I asked. He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. But then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, he began to speak. He told me about meeting Jiwon at a charity event. The irony of a woman like her, so good and decent, running into a man like him, was not lost on either of us. She had been immediately drawn to him, not because of his power or his wealth, but because she had seen something in him that others missed. Humanity. Beneath all the hardness and ruthlessness, she had detected the remnants of the boy he had once been before violence and ambition had remade him into something else. She had pursued him despite his resistance, despite his attempts to drive her away. Over time she had broken through his defenses, not through weakness but through persistence and genuine care. She had loved him not in spite of his flaws but because she recognized that he was a person capable of being loved, even if he didn't believe it himself. She was killed in a car accident 3 years ago, he said finally. Hit by a drunk driver. She died before the ambulance even arrived at the hospital. I'm so sorry, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I didn't think I could survive losing her, he continued, his voice hollow. 4 months after her death I wanted to die. Not in an active way, I didn't have the courage for suicide, but in a passive way. I hoped someone would kill me or that I'd be caught in some situation that would end me. Instead, I poured myself into my work, into power, into accumulation. He turned to face me then and I could see something new in his eye, not quite vulnerability, but a crack in the armor he had so carefully constructed around himself. What I'm trying to say is, he said slowly as if each word was difficult to speak, I can't love again. I don't have it in me. What I had with G1 was once in a lifetime. Losing it broke something that can't be fixed. So if you're hoping that this marriage might develop into something meaningful, you should abandon that hope now. It will only lead to disappointment. I listened to him speak about the parameters of our situation, and I understood that he was warning me, trying to establish realistic expectations. But I also heard beneath his words something else, a desperate desire to be understood, to have his pain acknowledged, to not have to pretend that he was simply a ruthless alpha without capacity for feeling. I'm not asking you to love me, I said quietly. I'm asking you to let me help you if I can. I'm not trying to replace your wife. I couldn't and I wouldn't even if I could. But that doesn't mean we have to be enemies, or that this marriage has to be purely transactional. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see the warring emotions behind his eye. Finally, he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement or perhaps agreement. "We should sleep," he said, and there was something almost gentle in his tone. "Tomorrow I have business meetings early in the morning." That night, when we lay in bed together, he didn't move to the far side as he had the previous nights. Instead, he remained on his side of the bed, but closer now, close enough that I could feel his warmth, close enough that the air between us seemed to crackle with tension and possibility. I fell asleep listening to his breathing, feeling the weight of his presence beside me, and for the first time since my father had told me of this marriage, I felt something other than fear or resignation. I felt a strange kind of hope. 2 weeks into our marriage, Kang Min came home from his business dealings with a specific request. "I've been asked about our marriage by several business associates," he said without preamble, pouring himself a drink. "They want confirmation that the marriage was, shall we say, consummated." I was in the middle of reading a book, a small refuge I had found in our increasingly tense cohabitation, and I looked up at him with raised eyebrows. "In other words, they want to know if you've betted me," I said plainly. "Yes," he replied, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. "I'm afraid my reputation for absolute ruthlessness is being questioned by this continued restraint on my part. It's being interpreted as weakness." I set my book aside carefully, considering my response. Over the past 2 weeks, we had settled into an uneasy routine that was almost comfortable at times. We would talk in the evenings, would share meals together, would exist in a kind of careful proximity that neither of us had crossed into true intimacy. But I understood the position he was in. A powerful alpha who had married an omega without immediately betting him would indeed be seen as unusual, and unusual could be interpreted as weak. In the world of organized crime and alpha hierarchy, weakness was a liability. "How long do you think we have before this becomes a serious problem?" I asked. "A few weeks, perhaps a month," he replied. "The longer this goes on, the more it becomes a topic of conversation, and conversation becomes doubt, and doubt becomes a challenge to my authority." "So you're asking me to have sex with you," I said slowly, "not out of desire but out of necessity. To preserve your reputation and your position." "Yes," he said simply. There was something almost refreshing about his honesty, even if the situation itself was complicated. But as I considered my response, I realized that my feelings on this matter had shifted considerably over the past 2 weeks. Kang Min was no longer a complete stranger or a terrifying enemy. He was becoming someone. A person with his own complicated pain and pressures. "I have a condition," I said finally. He raised his eyebrow again, a gesture that had become familiar to me. "You're in no position to have conditions." "I'm aware," I replied. "But I'm making one anyway. If we're going to do this, it's not going to be a violent or degrading experience. You're not going to treat me like a possession or a conquest. You're going to treat me like someone you care about even if you don't actually feel that way. Can you do that?" He was silent for a long moment, and I could see the calculation occurring behind his eye. "I can treat you with courtesy," he said finally. "Whether I can treat you with the kind of tenderness you might be hoping for is a different matter." "Courtesy is enough," I said, surprising myself with how calm I felt. "For now, courtesy is enough." What followed was a series of nights that were complicated, intense, and far more nuanced than I had anticipated. The first time was awkward. We were both trying too hard, both aware of the weight of expectation pressing down on this act. Kang Min approached the situation with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else in his life, examining my body as if it were a piece of machinery he needed to understand before operating it. "Relax," he murmured against my shoulder as my muscles tensed beneath his touch. "Your body is responding to your fear." "I know," I replied, my voice tight. "Give me a moment." He pulled back slightly, giving me space, and I closed my eyes, trying to separate the fear from the awareness of what was about to happen. This was my husband. Whatever complications surrounded this marriage, whatever darkness he carried, this was my husband, and I had agreed to this moment. When I opened my eyes again, I found him watching me with an intensity that took my breath away. For just a moment, I could see past the coldness, past the armor he had built around himself, and I caught a glimpse of something else. Something almost vulnerable. "Okay," I whispered. "I'm ready." What happened next was nothing like what I had feared. While Kang Min was certainly commanding, his alpha nature wouldn't allow him to be anything less. He was also surprisingly gentle. He moved with a kind of care that suggested he was trying to minimize my discomfort, that he was aware of the vulnerability of my position. It wasn't tender, exactly, but it was considerate in a way that caught me off guard. And as the initial discomfort faded, I found that my body responded to him in ways I hadn't expected. The Omega in me was thrilled by his strength, by his dominance, by the way his powerful frame engulfed mine. There was something deeply satisfying about being held by him, about surrendering, at least for a moment, to the intensity of the experience. When it was over, I lay beside him in the darkness, my body still trembling slightly, my mind trying to process what had just happened. He was breathing heavily, and for a moment, we simply existed in the aftermath together. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled me against him, tucking my head beneath his chin, his large hand splayed across my back. It was the most intimate moment we had shared thus far, and it felt significant in a way that transcended the physical act we had just completed. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "Are you?" I felt him tense slightly at the question, as if no one had thought to ask him that in a very long time. "Yes," he said finally. "I am." After that first time, a shift occurred in the dynamic between us. The physical intimacy, once initiated, became a regular part of our nights, but more importantly, something had changed in how we related to each other during the day as well. Kang Min began inviting me to events, charity galas, business dinners, functions where I would be presented as in these situations, he was the ruthless alpha everyone feared, commanding attention the moment he entered a room. But I noticed that his eye would find me frequently, checking on me, ensuring I was comfortable. And when we left these events, he would ask me how I had enjoyed myself, if anyone had been rude to me, if I needed anything. It was a far cry from the coldness of our first week. One evening, about a month into our marriage, I attended a meeting that I probably shouldn't have attended. I was in the office space that Kang Min maintained in a separate penthouse of the same building, an area that was normally off-limits to me, searching for some documents he had asked me to retrieve when I overheard a conversation. "He's soft now," a rough voice was saying. "I've seen it. The Omega has gotten to him. This is a liability." "Kang Min is many things, but soft isn't one of them," another voice replied. "The Omega serves a purpose. He provides legitimacy to Kang Min's operations, normalizes him. Beyond that, if Kang Min finds satisfaction in him, why should we care? Because softness leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to weakness, and weakness leads to challengers," the first voice said. "I'm simply suggesting we watch for signs that this marriage is affecting his judgment." I didn't stay to hear more of the conversation. I found the documents Kang Min had asked for and left the office, but the words haunted me. Was I a liability to him? Was my presence making him vulnerable? When he returned to our apartment that evening, I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. He didn't disturb me, simply changed into sleep clothes and lay down beside me as had become our custom. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the darkness, acutely aware of his presence, wrestling with the realization that my existence in his life had implications far beyond just our personal relationship. I was affecting his power structure, his standing among his associates. And if I was making him vulnerable, if my presence was seen as a weakness that could be exploited. "You're not asleep," he said quietly, and I realized that his eyes were open too, staring at the ceiling. "No," I admitted. "I'm not." "Why?" he asked. I could have lied. I could have made up some excuse about insomnia or an upset stomach. But I was finding that I couldn't lie to him, not anymore. "I heard some of your associates talking today," I said carefully. "They're concerned that I'm making you soft, that I'm a liability." I felt him tense beside me, and I knew that he was calculating exactly who had said these things and what consequences they might face for such indiscretion. "What they think doesn't concern me," he said finally. "But it concerns me," I replied. "Because if my presence is affecting your position, if I'm becoming a problem for you, then I'm not serving the purpose I married you to serve. I was supposed to help my family, not create more complications for you." He rolled onto his side to face me, his one eye studying me in the darkness. "Do you want me to send you away?" he asked, and there was something beneath the question, a note of something I might have described as concern if I didn't know better. "No," I said immediately. "But I need to know the truth about whether I'm hurting you." He reached out and cupped my face in his large hand, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone in a gesture that was almost tender. "You're not hurting me," he said quietly. "If anything, you're helping. But that's not something I'm accustomed to admitting, and it's certainly not something I'm comfortable with my associates knowing. The appearance of absolute ruthlessness is important in my world. What happens between us in private, that's separate from the empire I maintain. But for how long?" I asked. "At some point people will notice. At some point your softness, if that's what this is, will become undeniable. Then we'll deal with that when it happens," he said, and there was finality in his tone. "For now, I need you to trust that I can manage my own world. Can you do that?" I nodded, and he pulled me against him, my back to his chest, his arm wrapped protectively around my waist. It was becoming my favorite position, this close embrace in the darkness where we didn't have to maintain pretenses or carefully constructed facades. Good, he murmured into my hair. Now go to sleep. The incident that changed everything occurred on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday evening. I had been waiting for Kang Min to return from his business dealings, something I had grown accustomed to doing. Our apartment had begun to feel like home. I had added small touches of warmth to the cold minimalist space, placing plants in the corners, arranging flowers in vases, hanging curtains that let in the filtered light of the city below. The hours stretched past when he usually arrived. 9 o'clock became 10. 10 became 11. I began to worry, though I tried not to show it, occupying myself with a book I wasn't really reading. By midnight, concern had transformed into genuine anxiety. In the month that we had been married, Kang Min had maintained a fairly consistent schedule. Deviations from that schedule usually meant something was wrong. I was considering whether I should call his associates when I heard the door to our apartment open. I stood immediately, my heart already racing, expecting to see Kang Min. What I found instead was one of his security personnel, a large man named Taeyong, supporting Kang Min's weight as he practically dragged him inside. He's been in an accident, Taeyong said without preamble. Nothing life-threatening, but he's refused medical attention. I managed to get him home without incident. I rushed toward them, my mind immediately assessing Kang Min's condition. His suit was torn and stained with what appeared to be blood. His blood. There was a cut on his temple, and his left side seemed to be giving him pain, the way he was holding his ribs suggesting possible fractures. What happened? I demanded, already moving to help Taeyong support his weight. Drive-by shooting, Taeyong explained as we maneuvered Kang Min toward the bedroom. One of the other syndicates. They got several shots off before security could respond. Where are you hit? I asked urgently, trying to see if there were bullet wounds beneath the torn suit. Ribs, Kang Min said, his voice tight with pain. Bruised, not broken, I think. The rest is just superficial. You need a doctor, I said firmly. No doctors, he replied, and it was an alpha's command, absolute, not to be questioned. I can't afford to show weakness. If it becomes known that I was vulnerable enough to be shot, it will invite more attempts. I wanted to argue, but I understood the logic. In his world, admitting injury was tantamount to painting a target on yourself. All right, I said, shifting into practical mode. Taeyong, thank you for bringing him home. I'll take it from here. The security guard looked uncertain, clearly weighing his loyalty to his boss against his sense that Kang Min needed medical attention. Go, Kang Min said, his voice brooking no argument. Tell the others to double security. I want to know who ordered this hit within the hour. After Taeyong left, I helped Kang Min into the bedroom and carefully, methodically began removing his suit jacket. The ribs on his left side were already turning a mottled purple-black, indicating significant bruising. The temple wound was bleeding sluggishly, and there were several other cuts and abrasions that needed attention. I moved through the apartment with purpose, gathering the medical supplies we kept in the bathroom: bandages, disinfectant, pain medication. I had never thought of myself as particularly nurturing or domestic, but somehow in this moment, I found myself falling into the role with surprising ease. I cleaned and dressed his wounds carefully, aware of the way his body tensed beneath my touch. The alpha in him was struggling with the vulnerability of being cared for, his instincts warring with his need to allow someone to help him. When I had finished with the first aid, I sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion suddenly washing over me. You could have been killed, I said quietly. But I wasn't, he replied pragmatically. You could have been, I pressed. And if you had been, my father's debt would be unpaid and our marriage would mean nothing. You could have been killed and I would have been widowed after a month. There was something about saying these things aloud that made them real in a way they hadn't been before. The fragility of life, the precariousness of this situation we found ourselves in, it suddenly felt very immediate. Kang Min studied me for a long moment and I could see something working behind his eye. You care? He said, not as a question but as an observation. Of course I care, I replied, surprised by the vehemence in my own voice. Whether you want me to or not, whether you believe I should or not, I care about you. A month of living with someone, of being intimate with someone, of discovering who they are beneath the armor, that creates bonds whether we intended to create them or not. He reached out and pulled me toward him with surprising strength given his injuries, tucking my head against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my ear, steady and strong, and I was struck by the reality of his existence, that he was alive, that this moment was real, that I had come to care deeply for this man in a way I never expected to care for anyone. I've learned not to let people matter, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of loss and regret. Because when they matter, the world finds a way to take them from you. Then learn again, I said softly. Learning to matter, letting people matter, that's how we survive. That's how we become more than just the sum of our pain. He didn't respond verbally, but he held me closer, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted between us. The carefully maintained distance, the careful delineation between transactional and personal, it all began to crumble. The days following the shooting became a period of unexpected intimacy and vulnerability. Kang Min was forced to remain at home to avoid being seen by his associates in a condition that might suggest weakness, and the extended time together accelerated the process of deepening connection between us. I learned the small things about him, how he took his coffee, how he preferred classical music to other genres, how he occasionally allowed his stern expression to slip into something almost peaceful when he didn't think I was watching. He, in turn, learned more about me. He asked questions about my childhood, about my dreams before this marriage, about what I might have wanted to do with my life if circumstances had been different. I wanted to be a teacher, I admitted one evening as we sat together on the couch, his head resting against my shoulder, his injuries healing slowly but steadily. Maybe at a university level, teaching literature and philosophy. I loved learning and discussing ideas with people. But my family situation meant I had to work instead. After this, he said, and there was something almost tentative in his tone, as if he was uncertain how to phrase what he was about to say, after everything stabilizes, perhaps you could do that. If you wanted to. Would you allow it? I asked, surprised by the offer. I would support it, he replied. Intellectually, I mean. The world of finance and business needs people who understand philosophy. Perhaps you could do work that bridges those worlds. It was such a small thing, a casual suggestion, but it represented a fundamental shift in how he saw me. I was no longer just a transaction or a possession or even a wife in the traditional sense. I was becoming a partner, someone whose desires and aspirations mattered to him. 3 weeks after the shooting, when Kang Min's physical injuries had mostly healed, something else happened that I wasn't prepared for. I woke one morning to find him thrashing beside me, his skin burning with fever, his eye moving rapidly behind closed lids as though he was caught in a nightmare. His body was drenched in sweat, and when I touched his forehead, the heat radiating from him was terrifying. Kang Min, I said urgently, trying to wake him. Kang Min, wake up. He gasped as consciousness returned, his eyes snapping open, unseeing for a moment before focusing on me. But the focus that came was tinged with terror. Car? He gasped, his breathing ragged and uncontrolled. There's a car, it's coming at us, G1. You're safe, I said immediately, trying to ground him in the present moment. You're home. You're safe with me. But he was still caught in the grip of something. Some memory, some trauma that had manifested as both fever and nightmare. His powerful frame was trembling, and I could see the exact moment that he realized he was panicking. The shame of that panic flickered across his features before he seemed to retreat back into the nightmare, or perhaps forward into a different kind of horror. His breathing became erratic, his hands clenched into fists, and I realized with dawning horror that Kang Min was experiencing a full panic attack. Breathe, I commanded, using the same tone he used when he needed people to listen. Kang Min, you need to breathe. Look at me. Focus on my face. His eye found mine, and I could see the fear there, raw, unguarded, the complete antithesis of the ruthless alpha he projected to the world. In through your nose, I said slowly, demonstrating the breathing. Hold it for 4 counts. Now out through your mouth. Again. Hold. Out. We did this for several minutes, his breathing slowly becoming less frantic, his body gradually relaxing as consciousness and present reality began to override the trauma playing out in his mind. It was the accident, he said finally, his voice hoarse. The one that took G1. I was there. She was driving and a truck ran a red light and hit the passenger side. She died instantly. I woke up in the hospital unable to see out of my left eye. And sometimes when I'm sick or my defenses are down, my mind takes me back there and I relive it all over again. You're not in the car, I said softly, still holding his hand. You're in our bed in our apartment in Seoul in 2024. G1's accident happened 3 years ago. You're alive and you're safe and I'm here with you. He pulled me against him as if he needed to feel my presence, my solidity, to confirm that reality was still intact around him. I'm terrified, he whispered into my hair, and the admission of fear from this powerful man was somehow both breaking and beautiful. I'm terrified that I'm going to lose you too, that this will all be taken from me the way everything else has been taken. I'm not going anywhere, I promised. I'm right here and I'm not leaving. The fever remained present throughout the day, and I took on the role of caretaker with surprising ease. I brought him water and pain medication, coaxed him to eat broth and light foods, applied cool compresses to his forehead when the fever spiked again. There was something deeply intimate about caring for someone in a vulnerable state. More intimate in some ways than physical encounters. To be trusted with someone's pain, their fear, their absolute need, it was a profound responsibility. As the day wore on and his fever climbed higher, I made a decision. I called his security team and told them that under no circumstances was anyone to disturb us, and that if any business emerged that required his attention, they were to handle it themselves. There was a moment of hesitation on the other end of the line. Clearly this was not a typical request, but eventually they agreed. Kang Min doesn't get sick, one of his associates said flatly. Well, he's sick now, I replied. And he's going to stay home and he's going to recover, and none of you are going to disturb him until I say it's safe. Are we clear? The authority in my voice, the absolute certainty that I would not be questioned on this, must have been convincing because the man on the other end simply said, "Yes, sir," and hung up. Kang Min, who had been listening to the entire conversation, opened his eye to look at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're protecting me," he said. "Yes," I replied simply. "You need rest and care, not business concerns. Let me do this." Over the next 72 hours, I barely left his side. I bathed him with cool water when his fever spiked too high. I fed him when he was lucid enough to eat. I held him during the night terrors that continued to plague him despite the fever reducing. Through all of this, something was shifting in Kang Min. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the way he held on to me even when he was sleeping, as if he was terrified that if he let go, I would vanish. On the third day, as his fever finally broke and he lay exhausted but lucid in our bed, he took my hand and pulled me close. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why what?" I replied, though I understood the question beneath the question. "Why are you still here? Why are you being so good to me when I've been nothing but terrible to you from the moment we met?" I considered his question carefully, aware that his answer to this would shape something fundamental in our relationship. "Because you're my husband," I said finally. "And because somewhere over the past month, you stopped being a transaction and became a person I care about. Because when someone you care about is hurting, you don't walk away from that. You stay. You help. You be there. Even when that person has done terrible things?" he asked quietly. "Even then," I confirmed. "Because doing terrible things doesn't make you a terrible person. It makes you a person who has done terrible things, and there's a difference. A small one maybe, but a difference." He was quiet for a long moment and then something seemed to break inside him, not in a destructive way but in a way that released something that had been tightly bound. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said, his voice barely audible. "And I don't know what to do with that. I didn't think I was capable of loving again. I thought that part of me died with G1. I felt my own throat tighten with emotion, tears beginning to blur my vision. "You are," I said softly. "You are capable of loving. You're doing it right now, even if it's scary and unfamiliar." "What if I lose you?" he asked, and the vulnerability in his eye was heartbreaking. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," I replied, repeating words he had once said to me. "But we can't let fear of the future prevent us from being present in the now." He pulled me close and kissed me then, not the passionate, controlled kisses we had shared before, but something deeper, more honest, filled with a tenderness that suggested his emotional defenses were as compromised as his physical health. It was the first kiss I felt like he truly meant, and it changed everything. In the days following Kang Min's fever, our relationship transformed from whatever tentative thing it had been into something that could only be described as genuine love. It started with small gestures. He began leaving notes for me in places I would discover them, on the bathroom mirror, in the pocket of my jacket, bookmarking pages and books I was reading. Some were simple observations. "I like the way you hum while you cook." Others were more profound. "Thank you for seeing the man I could be instead of only the man I've been." I reciprocated with my own gestures, preparing his favorite foods, ensuring his coffee was exactly how he liked it, leaving small gifts or flowers without explanation beyond, "I saw this and thought of you." There was a day about a week after his fever broke, when he came home early from his business dealings, unprecedented in our month plus of marriage, and found me sitting on our balcony watching the sun set over Seoul's skyline. "You're home early," I observed as he came to stand beside me, his arms settling around my waist with the ease of something that had become familiar and comfortable. "I realized I'd rather be here," he said simply. "With you. Everything else could wait." I turned to look at him, studying his profile as he gazed out at the city. The scar around his left eye, the mark of the accident that had taken his wife, was visible in the golden light of the sunset, but it was no longer the most noticeable thing about him to me. Now I saw the fine lines around his eye that suggested he smiled more than people realized, the strength of his jawline, the vulnerability that was becoming increasingly visible as he allowed me closer to his true self. "I love you," I said, and the words felt momentous and terrifying and absolutely necessary. He turned to face me fully, and I watched something flicker across his features: joy, relief, fear, hope, all in rapid succession. "Say it again," he said softly. "I love you," I repeated. "I know this is complicated and unexpected, but it's true. Somewhere between the transaction and the month of living together and caring for you through fever and fear, I fell in love with you." He kissed me then, deeply and thoroughly, his hands cradling my face with tenderness that suggested he was afraid I might break. When we finally parted, his eye was glistening with tears. "I love you too," he said. "I didn't think I would ever say those words again, and I'm terrified that I'm going to lose you because that seems to be my curse. But I love you, Hyun-woo. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." We made love that night with a passion and tenderness that transcended the physical act. It was a conversation conducted in touches and kisses, in the way our bodies fit together, in the absolute vulnerability we allowed each other. For the first time since we met, there was no performance, no careful maintenance of distance or pretense. There was only Hyun-woo and Kang-min, two people in love, discovering each other completely. Afterward, as we lay intertwined in our bed, Kang-min traced patterns on my chest over my heart. "I want to marry you again," he said unexpectedly. "Properly. With love and intention instead of transaction and desperation." "We're already married," I pointed out gently. "I know," he replied. "But not like this. Not with both of us certain of our feelings and commitment. I want to do it right. I want to stand in front of people and tell the world that I love you, that I chose you, that you're mine and I'm yours." "Okay," I said softly. "We'll do that. Whenever you want." He shifted to kiss my forehead, his lips lingering against my skin. "Soon," he said. "I want to shout it to the world before something takes you away from me." There was still fear beneath his words, fear born of profound loss, but there was also hope and love, and the beginnings of healing. The second wedding took place a month later, on a beautiful autumn day in Seoul. Kang-min had insisted on a proper ceremony, with genuine celebration rather than transactional efficiency. The guest list included not just his criminal associates but also people from his legitimate business dealings, several of whom had connections to the world of art and culture that Kang-min apparently cared about more than I had realized. My father attended, and I could see the shock on his face when he witnessed the obvious love between Kang-min and myself. The man who had looked cold and dangerous at our first wedding now looked at me with such tenderness and devotion that my father actually took me aside during the reception to apologize for putting me in this situation. "He loves you," my father had said, still processing the reality before him. "Actually genuinely loves you." "He does," I confirmed. "And I love him." "How is this possible?" my father asked. "How did this happen?" "I don't know exactly," I replied honestly. "But I do know that I'm happy. Happier than I expected to be in a situation like this. We found each other beneath all the complications and pain, and we chose each other." My father embraced me then, and I could feel the weight of guilt lifting from him. Not entirely perhaps, but enough that he could look me in the eye again without shame. The ceremony itself was conducted by a beautiful woman who was apparently a friend of Kang-min's from before Ji-won's death. She spoke about love as both a vulnerability and a strength, about how the greatest acts of courage were often acts of opening our hearts to another person. When Kang-min and I exchanged our new vows, vows that we had written ourselves, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "I promise to love you fiercely and completely," Kang-min said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To protect you not from the world but within it. To grow with you and to allow you to grow. To be your partner in whatever comes next, for as long as we both shall live." My vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to love you for who you are, not who you were or who others expect you to be. To support your healing and your growth. To stand beside you through darkness and light. To be your home as you have become mine." When we kissed as a newly rude couple, the celebration that erupted was genuine and joyful. Kang-min held me aloft briefly, kissing me again, and the genuine happiness on his face was something I committed to memory, this moment when a man who had believed himself incapable of happiness had reclaimed it. The weeks following our second wedding brought a period of peace and happiness that felt almost surreal given everything that had come before. Kang-min's associates gradually adjusted to the new dynamic between us. It became clear that my presence wasn't a weakness to be exploited but rather a source of stability that actually made Kang-min more effective in his dealings. A man who was content, who had something to lose, was often more careful and strategic than a man driven by pure ambition and the need to fill a void. There were still dangerous moments. The criminal underworld didn't suddenly become safe or honest, but we navigated them together. I learned more about Kang Min's operations than I probably should have, simply by existing in the same space as him. But I never asked for details that weren't voluntarily shared, never expressed judgment about the business he conducted, and in return he never involved me in situations that could put me in danger. It was a balance, carefully maintained, but it worked. Around the 3-month mark of our marriage, or 4 months if you counted from the original wedding, I began to notice changes in my body. Small things at first. Slight nausea in the mornings, an increased sensitivity to smells, a tenderness in my chest that was unfamiliar. I had learned through my research about omega physiology that omegas could conceive with alphas, though it was increasingly rare in modern Seoul where many omegas opted for permanent contraception to maintain career flexibility and life control. I had never discussed contraception with Kang Min, simply assuming that we would handle it if the situation arose. The situation had apparently arisen. I confirmed the pregnancy with a home test before scheduling a proper medical appointment. The reality of it, a new life growing inside me, was both thrilling and terrifying. I wasn't sure how Kang Min would respond. Yes, he loved me, but a pregnancy was another level of commitment, another way that I was tying him to a future he couldn't fully control. I decided to tell him during an evening when we were relaxing together in our apartment, away from business distractions. I have something to tell you, I said, my heart thundering in my chest. He immediately tensed, his protective instincts activating. What's wrong? Are you hurt? Are you sick? I'm not hurt, I assured him. I'm not sick exactly. I'm pregnant. For a moment he simply stared at me, processing the information. His face was unreadable, alpha features schooled into perfect blankness even as his eye widened slightly. Pregnant, he repeated. With my child. With our child, I corrected gently. Yes. Then something shifted in his expression and joy, pure, unadulterated joy, bloomed across his features. We're having a baby? He asked, and the wonder in his voice was almost enough to undo me. We are, I confirmed, smiling at his reaction. I know we never explicitly discussed this, and if you're not ready... He kissed me, cutting off my words, his kiss filled with such tenderness and passion that I felt like my heart might burst from my chest. I'm ready, he said when we separated. I'm terrified, but I'm ready. We're having a baby, Hyunwoo. Our baby. He immediately pulled me against him, his hand settling protectively over my still flat stomach. I will protect this child with everything I am, he said quietly, with the absolute certainty of an alpha making a vow. No harm will come to our baby. I swear it. I know, I replied, believing him completely. I know you will. The pregnancy was surprisingly smooth in its early stages. I experienced the typical discomforts, nausea, fatigue, food aversions, but nothing that felt dangerous or concerning. Kang Min turned into what I could only describe as an obsessive caretaker, researching omega pregnancy with the same intensity he brought to his business dealings, ensuring I was eating nutritious foods, scheduling my medical appointments and attending each one personally. There was a moment during our third medical appointment when the doctor confirmed that I was carrying twins. Twins? Kang Min asked, his eye widening slightly. Yes, 2 healthy fetuses, the doctor confirmed. Quite common in omega pregnancies, actually. Often happens in the first pregnancy for an omega who hasn't previously used contraception. I looked at Kang Min to gauge his reaction, and I was gratified to see pure delight written across his face. Twins, he repeated as if tasting the word. He reached over and took my hand, raising it to his lips to kiss my palm. We're having twins. Is that okay? I asked, suddenly uncertain. I know we didn't discuss this possibility. More than okay, he replied. It's perfect. Our family all at once. There was something in the way he said, our family, that touched something deep within me. This man who had believed himself incapable of family, of love, of happiness, was now expecting twins with a man he had married out of desperation but had come to love genuinely and completely. As my pregnancy progressed and my belly swelled with our developing children, Kang Min's protective behaviors intensified. He hired a prenatal care specialist to work with me, ensured that our penthouse apartment had been retrofitted with the latest safety features, and began planning a nursery with the meticulousness of someone planning a military operation. There was something deeply satisfying about watching him engage with this role of expectant father. It revealed a side of him that few people ever got to see, the capacity for gentleness, for tenderness, for the kind of love that wasn't about possession or control but about nurturing and protection. One evening, as I sat on our balcony watching the sunset, he came to stand behind me, his hands settling on my swollen belly. Are they moving? He asked softly. Yes, I replied, taking one of his hands and moving it to where I could feel a kick. Feel that? I feel it, he whispered, wonder filling his voice. That's our child. Our children. What should we name them? I asked, turning to face him. He was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. I have an idea, he said finally. For one of them. The girl, if that's what we're having. I'd like to name her G1 after my late wife. Is that too much? It's beautiful, I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. It's a way of honoring her memory, of acknowledging that she helped make you who you are, who we are now. And the boy? He asked. You choose, I said. I want them both to have names that mean something to you. He thought for a moment, then said, Minjun. That was my father's name. He died when I was young, but he was a good man. I'd like to honor him. Minjun and G1, I said, testing the names. They're beautiful. He bent down and kissed my forehead, then lower, kissing my belly. Hello, Minjun and G1, he whispered. Welcome to the world. Your Appa is going to love you more than you can possibly imagine. The delivery came at 7 months, not dangerously premature, but earlier than initially expected. I woke one night feeling contractions, and despite my attempts to stay calm and measured, panic quickly set in. Kang Min, who had been sleeping lightly, as he did most nights now, his protective instincts making deep sleep difficult, was immediately alert and moving. Hospital, he commanded, already reaching for his phone. We're going to the hospital now. The drive was surreal, Kang Min driving with a precision and care that suggested the twins could feel every bump if they wanted to. He held my hand when he could while keeping his eye on the road, his jaw clenched with tension and concern. The hospital staff recognized him immediately, though whether that was because of his legitimate business holdings or his reputation in the criminal underworld, I couldn't be sure. Either way, they moved with efficiency, getting me into a labor and delivery suite, attaching monitors to track the twins' heart rates and my contractions. How long? I asked the attending nurse, my fear translating into clinical questions. Impossible to say exactly, she replied kindly. Some labors are quick, some are long. First pregnancies with twins can go either way. What happened was what could only be described as a long, intense labor that lasted nearly 18 hours. Throughout it all, Kang Min remained at my side, holding my hand, offering encouragement, refusing to leave even for a moment despite the staff's suggestions that he might want to rest. I'm not leaving, he said firmly when a nurse suggested he take a break. My husband and my children need me here. During the most intense contractions, when I felt like my body was being torn apart by the effort of delivering 2 babies, he was there with cool cloths and whispered encouragement. You're so strong, he murmured into my hair during a particularly intense contraction. You're so beautiful and so strong, and our children are lucky to have you. I can't do this, I gasped as another wave hit me. You can, he said firmly. You're already doing it. I can see them, they're almost here. Just a little longer. The final push came after what felt like an eternity, and suddenly there was a baby, a small, angry-looking infant with a shock of dark hair and what appeared to be Kang Min's features in miniature. That's your daughter, the doctor said, handing the baby to a waiting nurse. She's healthy, good size for being premature. A few more pushes, and then there was another baby, a son equally angry and vocal about his entrance into the world. Twin boys, the doctor corrected herself. My apologies, we have 2 boys here. I watched as Kang Min's face transformed with wonder and love as he watched our sons being cleaned and assessed by the medical staff. The ruthless Mafia Alpha had been completely undone by the sight of his newborn children. Can I hold them? He asked urgently. After the initial assessments confirmed that both boys were healthy despite their early arrival, the nurses placed one tiny infant in each of Kang Min's arms. He looked absolutely terrified, as if he was afraid that any wrong move might break them. They're so small, he whispered, staring down at his sons with an expression of such tenderness and awe that I felt my heart swell nearly to bursting. They're perfect, I said quietly. And they're ours. They're ours, he repeated as if confirming the reality of it. Minjun and, what should we call the other one? We had been so prepared for one of each that we hadn't discussed names for 2 boys. Jin Ho. I suggested, the name coming to me suddenly. After your mother's maiden name? I want to honor her too for raising you into the man who could love like this. Jin Ho, Kang Min said softly, looking down at his second son. Hello Minjun and Jin Ho. I'm your Appa, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how loved you are. I watched my husband who had started this marriage as a cold, ruthless alpha incapable of feeling anything, cradle our newborn sons with a tenderness that suggested he had been born to be a father. And I felt something shift inside me, a settling, a rightness, a sense that despite all the complications and pain that had led to this moment, we had somehow arrived at exactly where we were meant to be. The next few weeks were simultaneously the most exhausting and most beautiful of my life. Adjusting to motherhood, or more accurately fatherhood in my case, since I was the omega and carried the primary responsibility for feeding our infants, was challenging in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The twins had different temperaments. Minjun was calm and contemplative, sleeping easily and eating on a regular schedule. Jinho was more temperamental, requiring constant attention and soothing, as if the world hadn't quite lived up to his expectations upon his arrival. Kangmin, surprisingly, took to parenting with the same strategic and meticulous approach he brought to everything else in his life. He created a schedule for feedings and diaper changes, ensured that our apartment was equipped with every conceivable baby product, and seemed to find genuine joy in the mundane tasks of parenting. There was a moment about 2 weeks after the twins' birth, when I woke in the early morning to find Kangmin sitting in the nursery, holding both babies despite the fact that they should have been sleeping. "What are you doing?" I whispered, not wanting to startle him. "Watching them sleep," he said simply. "Sometimes I still can't believe they're real. That we made them. That they're ours." I came to stand beside him, placing my hand on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" I asked. "Incredibly," he replied, and the certainty in his voice was absolute. "I never thought I would be happy again after Ji-won died. I thought that was my one chance at joy and I'd had it. But this, you and these two beautiful boys, this is happiness on a level I didn't know was possible." "I'm glad," I said softly. He looked up at me, and in the dim light of the nursery I could see tears on his cheeks. "Thank you," he said, "for agreeing to marry me, for staying when you had every reason to leave, for loving me despite everything I am, for giving me these boys. Thank you for saving my life, Hyun-woo." I bent down and kissed the top of his head. "You saved mine too," I replied. "We saved each other. As the twins grew, so did our life together." Kang-min gradually began transitioning away from the more violent aspects of his criminal enterprises, delegating power to trusted associates and focusing instead on the legitimate business holdings that had been growing steadily. It was a gradual process, and I'm sure it was met with resistance from some quarters, but his reputation was secure enough that no one dared challenge him directly. We settled into a kind of domestic bliss that seemed incongruous with Kang-min's history and reputation but felt absolutely right to me. He would come home from business meetings and immediately seek out the twins, playing with them and tending to their needs. On weekends, he would take me and the boys to parks and cafes, and I watched with fascination as people recognized him and their demeanor would shift from casual to deferential. But around me and the children, Kang-min was just that. Just a man who loved his family fiercely and without reservation. There was a particular evening that I hold dear in my memory, about 6 months after the twins' birth. We were all in the living room, Kang-min on the floor playing with Minjun and Jinho while they babbled and cooed, me reading a book on the couch. Minjun, who had been trying to crawl, suddenly managed to pull himself forward several inches. He looked so shocked by his own accomplishment that it made all of us laugh. "Did you see that?" Kang-min exclaimed, his eye bright with pride. "Did you see what Minjun did?" "He crawled," I said, setting down my book. "Our baby is growing up." "Both of them are," Kang-min said, picking up Jinho and tossing him gently in the air, catching him as Jinho shrieked with delight. "Growing too fast. I'm going to blink and they'll be teenagers." "Then we'd better make the most of now," I replied, coming to join him on the floor. We sat there, the four of us, in our small corner of the world, and I felt such overwhelming gratitude and peace that it almost hurt. This man, this scarred, damaged, complicated man who had started our relationship wanting to dominate and control, had become my partner in building a life. We had taken the ashes of his old life and his grief and my family's desperation, and we had built something beautiful. A year after the twins' birth, Kang-min and I renewed our vows again, not in a formal ceremony this time, but in our own way as a family. My father was there, watching with tears of joy as his son, the son he had sacrificed so much for, stood with his family and spoke words of love and commitment. "When we first met, I thought you were a possession I had acquired to settle a debt," Kang-min said, speaking directly to me. "I was wrong. You were never a possession. You were a person of strength and principle, and you transformed me. You made me believe that I could be more than the sum of my pain and my past. You gave me family, real family, not just people bound to me by fear or obligation. And I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that you know how grateful I am for that, and how much I love you." My response was equally heartfelt. I came into this marriage terrified and uncertain. I didn't know how to navigate being married to a stranger, to a powerful alpha, to a man the entire city feared. But you showed me that beneath all that power and fear, you were just a person trying to survive, trying to protect yourself from further pain. And somehow we found each other and we chose each other and we built this life. And I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you, watching our children grow, growing old together, being the home for each other that we both needed. The twins, now active toddlers, played at our feet as we spoke, their presence serving as a testament to the life we had created together. Later that evening, after the twins were in bed and my father had returned to his home, Kang Min and I sat together on our balcony, looking out at Seoul's glittering skyline. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Marrying me?" "Never," I replied immediately. "Not for a moment. This life, our life, is everything I could have hoped for and more." "Do you regret it?" "Not even for a second," he said, pulling me close. "I was dead inside before you came into my life. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I was just accepting reality, managing without feeling. But I was dead. And you brought me back to life, Hyun-woo. You and our children. We're your life now," I said softly. "You're our life. We're not a transaction or a settlement or a replacement for what you lost. We're just us, your family, the people who love you most." "I know," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "And I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. More than I love breathing. More than I love living. You are the center of my universe, and I will protect that center with everything I am." He kissed me then, deeply and thoroughly, and I felt the same rush of emotion and love that I felt every time our lips met: gratitude, passion, joy, and the deep satisfaction of being known and loved completely by another person. Our twins are 6 years old now, full of energy and personality and all the wonder that comes with childhood. Minjun is studious and thoughtful, preferring books to sports, already showing signs of the strategic mind that runs in his father's blood but applying it to chess and puzzles instead of criminal enterprises. Jinho is his father made small, charismatic, confident, with a charming smile that I suspect will get him into and out of trouble in equal measure throughout his life. Our life has settled into a comfortable rhythm that never ceases to amaze me. Kang Min continues to run his businesses, though he's increasingly delegated responsibility to trusted associates. He attends fewer late-night meetings and more of the twins' school events. He still maintains the commanding presence that made him feared throughout Seoul, but now he also reads bedtime stories in a ridiculous voice that makes the twins giggle. I finished my degree, studying literature and philosophy remotely while managing the household and our children, and I've begun teaching at a small university, offering seminars on ethics and modern literature. Kang Min was right. There is a bridge between philosophy and business, and I've found satisfaction in that bridge. My father, who initially carried such guilt about forcing me into this marriage, has become a regular visitor to our home. The twins adore their grandfather, and I watch with joy as he tells them stories of my childhood, of their father's sacrifice, of how their family came together in the most unexpected way. There are still moments when I think about how unlikely this all is. A marriage that started as a transaction has become one of genuine partnership and love. A man who believed himself incapable of feeling has become a devoted husband and father. A person who was forced into sacrifice has discovered that sacrifice, when given willingly, can be the source of profound happiness. Last night, as I was putting the twins to bed, Minjun asked me why Kang Min was their appa instead of their yama, why their father was the one who had carried them in his body when they were born. "Because our family is different from some other families," I explained gently. "Your appa is an omega like some men are. And I'm an alpha like some men are. And we love each other and we wanted to have children together, so we did. And that's okay. Love doesn't have a specific shape or form. It just matters that it's real and it's strong. So I'm part alpha and part omega?" Minjun asked thoughtfully. "In a way, yes," I confirmed. "You have my traits and your Yama's traits mixed together. You're your own person with your own strengths and your own path to follow." He seemed satisfied with that answer, cuddling against me as I finished his bedtime story. After both boys were asleep, I found Kang Min on our balcony, a drink in hand, his eye distant as he gazed out at the city. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, coming to stand beside him. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," he said, turning to look at me. "That I somehow managed to find not just love but family. That I was given a second chance after I was sure all my chances were used up. That every morning I wake up grateful for this life." "So am I," I said, taking the drink from his hand and setting it aside so I could embrace him fully. "Do you know what I was thinking about before we got married?" he asked. "Before you came into my life?" "What?" I asked. "How I could die and no one would truly mourn me," he said quietly. "Oh, my associates might perform the ritual, but no one would actually grieve. No one would miss me as a person. I thought that was the price of power, loneliness. I thought I had accepted that. But," I prompted. "But I was wrong," he said. "So completely, utterly wrong. Turns out that the price of power is nothing compared to the reward of having someone love you. Having children who call you Appa and run to hug you when you come home. having a partner who sees you, truly sees you, and loves you not despite your flaws but alongside them. I kissed him then, soft and gentle, a reminder that I was here, that this was real, that whatever pain and darkness he had survived, he had come out the other side into light. Sometimes I think about fate and choice, about how my life might have gone differently if my father hadn't taken that loan, if Kang Min hadn't been the one to acquire the debt, if I had refused to marry him instead of accepting my fate with courage and determination. I think about how I was raised by a man who believed that sacrifice for family was noble and necessary. I think about how Kang Min was shaped by a world that taught him that power and control were the only things worth having. And I think about how somehow, despite our vastly different starting points, we found our way to each other. My marriage to Kang Min wasn't what I expected when I first walked down the aisle in that beautiful hanbok, terrified and uncertain of my future. It was better. It was real and honest and filled with the kind of love that doesn't just transform individual lives but transforms everything it touches. The cold Mafia alpha who wanted nothing but a plaything to control became a man capable of vulnerability and tenderness. The dutiful Omega who sacrificed himself for his family discovered that the greatest sacrifices often lead to the greatest joys. And the twins, Minjun and Jinho, were born into a family built on genuine love, with two parents who chose each other not out of desperation or obligation but out of pure affection and commitment. Every night, before sleep claims me, I lie in bed beside my husband. The man who was once a stranger, then an enemy, then a transaction, then slowly, gradually, beautifully became my person, and I count my blessings. A family. A home. A love that transcends all the complications and pain that brought us together. That is everything.